This sequence illustrates the power of the check. 2 bishop b5 isn't a good move, but it's one of the first possible checks. So we're quickly reminded of the forcing nature of checks. Black must do something to get out of check. More forcing than check is the double check, because 2 of the methods for getting out of check, capturing the checking piece and inner position, are not possible. Judge Meek against Amateur is a good game to demonstrate the power of the double check because it's so short. The King's Gambit move is designed to help White gain center control by deflecting the e5 pawn from the center, or perhaps capturing on e5. But after Black plays ef, White can't rush to play d4 because Queen h4 would be a nasty check. Knight f3 prevents that check. d5 is a good move because Black has to fight for center control. When White plays knight c3, Black should probably play knight f6 to bring up a new piece and renew his threat to e4. de is not such a good move because White's pieces come forward with the recapture. Every even trade, pawn for pawn, rook for rook, every even trade benefits the side whose pieces come forward with the recapture. So White won the swap on e4 because his knight got a free move out of it. Bishop g4 enables White to set a very clever trap. Queen e2 baits the hook, and bishop f3 falls right into it. Surely Black was expecting White to lose another move by playing queen f3 here, but the big surprise is knight f6 checkmate. The normal methods for getting out of check don't apply when there's a double check on the board. Black can't capture a checking piece with, say, bishop e2 or knight f6 because the other piece is still checking. Inner position doesn't serve to get out of a double check. Bishop e7 wouldn't do because the knight is still checking. The only way to get out of a double check is to move the king, and the king has no legal moves. d7's cut off by the knight, e7 by the queen. So if we move back a move here, the other double check, knight d6, is not mate because that gives Black a flight square. Miller-Chernev, New York 1935, shows that same pattern in a slightly longer game. The Scotch game was wildly popular during the 80s when world champion Kasparov revived it. White can look forward to a slight edge for a long time. White's recapture on d4 gained a little bit of time. Since the black center pawn will probably have to stop on d6, White will also have a little more space for roaming on 4 rows, while Black is confined to 3. The Scotch is an excellent weapon for grandmasters because they're good enough to push these slight advantages, a slight advantage in time plus a slight advantage in space, to a winning conclusion. Lesser players ought to be a little more adventurous and offer another pawn with c3. But knight d4 is certainly the soundest move. Black has 3 developing threatening moves here. Bishop c5 develops with a threat. Queen h4 develops with a threat. Knight f6. The popular method during the 80s was for White to play knight c6 plus e5, and then White has gained an additional row of space while mussing the black pawn position. Miller chose bishop g5 to pin the knight. Black unpinned. It isn't clear how Black intends to go if White accepts this gambit on g7. White made a mistake when he played knight e7, For one thing, that brings a black piece forward. For another, he's bringing a black piece forward with a huge threat. The double check is such a powerful device that in this game between Mr. and Mrs. Michelson, White sacrificed a piece to bring about a position in which a double check was possible and won the game. Black is trailing in development here, so it's rather risky for the player behind in development to open the game. White is ahead in development, so chooses to further open it while improving his development prospects. That's the problem with the early f-pawn advances, is that they don't do enough for one's development. This pawn trade brought a white piece forward. Bringing the white knight forward enables bishop c4 to become a development with a threat. Bishop f7 and knight f7. Black cannot safely win the piece on d5 because the capture on d5 takes the knight away from the defense of h5, and this is a strong queen check. If the king had moved to e7, then queen f7 would win. After g6, knight g6 threatens discoveries, the h7 pawn is pinned, and the knight capture itself makes a discovery against the d5 knight. Knight f6 gets the d5 knight off the hook while hitting the piece that will make the check. An outstanding move here is bishop f7. White will win in case of king d7 plus queen f5. Bishop f4 will be the winner. Other answer to 10 bishop f7 is to capture, and since the king is on f7, that makes knight e5 a double check. King e7 and king e6 are the same, no matter which of those squares black chooses. Queen f7 follows, after which king d6, knight c4 is a pretty checkmate. And after king f5, g4 is also a lovely checkmate, taking advantage of this pin on the f6 knight. We can imagine that Mr. Michelson had to spend a couple nights on the couch after this game.